versus Baal, or the Lord versus Baal, would be another way to look at what we're doing, because this contest on the surface looks like a contest between the king and the prophet, but really it's a contest between each of their gods. Ahab's adopted god, Baal, and he's got a couple of others we'll talk about, and then Elijah's god. Remember, Elijah, the name means God is the Lord, or my God is Yahweh. So El is the word for God. E always, in Hebrew, when you spot an I like that, it'll just be the pronoun, modifying pronoun my. So my God is Yah, short for Yahweh. So and you can see in the contest between the two, when he comes to meet Ahab, my God's Yahweh, who's yours, is sort of the way that conversation runs. All right, so we'll look at the text. Remember now the context, I overdid that last time, but the immediate context is the split in the monarchy in 930. We're about 70 years later, somewhere along in the 860s, 850s. Ahab ruled from like 874, but he's obviously been king a little while when these events take place, because he has already got a reputation. He's the sixth of the northern kingdom kings. The split in the kingdom, remember, back at 930, 931. Rehoboam, the foolish, idiot grandson of David, Solomon's boy, he's a southern kingdom, and we're not doing anything to do with southern kingdom right now. All this enterprise, and then there is something amazing about God showing an interest in warning the people or in doing any kind of business with northern kingdom people. And yet he, even though they split away from David and David's dynasty, yet still God sends ambassadors to him. He'll keep doing that. I mean, Amos was an ambassador of the northern kingdom. Hosea was a prophet to the northern kingdom. So anyway, here we go. That piece right before chapter 17 is just a lengthy description. 6 statements about Ahab, all bad. Just to set the stage for God sending an ambassador to do hand-to-hand combat, really, with this most wicked of all Israelite kings. So we looked last time at the one verse where he shows up. He comes from a cross that comes from the east side of the Jordan, comes across over to what would be, if I had drawn a map, it'd be about the central part of Samaria, which is just north of Jerusalem, 100 miles or so, or a little better. And he goes to, evidently Samaria has been built at this point, and he says, I stand before the Lord, and there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. Now I want to remind you, the prophets were ambassadors of the Mosaic covenant, and there's the provision for them. It shows up in Deuteronomy 18. When Moses talked to the people about their future, he said, when you disobey, the Lord says he's going to send a prophet. The Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me, this is Moses speaking, from among your brothers, and you shall listen to him. And if you go down to the end of that, it says, I'll put my words in his mouth, and he'll speak just what I command him. And if you don't listen, I'll require those words of you. Now, then he talks about the presumptuous prophet who's not speaking in him, because you had fake guys. And then the issue is the last line then in that provision in Deuteronomy 18 runs like this. When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet in that case has spoken presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him. All through the prophets, Isaiah 41 and 42 is a classic illustration. The prophets of 41 were the and that's northern kingdom and southern kingdom both. But there you have a picture of the prophets, and the statement about them is, they're not real prophets. They can't. I have predicted what will come to pass. See if they can do that. So this notion of being able to predict the future is a hallmark for identifying true prophet versus false prophet. In 42, you know, the last line of, when I preached that a while back, 42, I think it's verse 10. The old things are gone. And new things are coming. Behold, I tell them to you. So, God, the Lord speaks of knowing the future and explaining the future, because, of course, he performs the future. That's how he knows it. But he uses that as a marker of his identity as to be distinguished from all the fakes. Okay, so that's what you have here with Elijah. He's not like he comes in the middle of a drought and says, God says he's going to bring a drought. You and I can do that. Now, this is, this is a prosperous, easy day. And if you read the old preachers, William Taylor, great Scottish preacher in New York in the 19th century, he has one just long sermon just on this one. And he says, and the old guy said, we had a drought like this back in 21. It's nothing to worry about it. The later rains will take care of it. And then when the latter rains don't come, we had a bad year. I remember back in 14 we had a bad year. Don't worry about it. So it takes a long time for people to realize, what do you know? And of course, by the time people realize this really is something bad, Elijah's gone. He's skipped. So that's the first thing to look at, away to the hills. So the Lord tells him, verse 2, the word came to him, depart from here, turn eastward, hide yourself by the brook Kerith, which is east of the Jordan. So he goes back somewhere maybe near Gilead. Nobody knows exactly where this is, but in his territory. You shall drink from a brook that I've provided ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. The notion of the word of the Lord appears to this chapter 10 times. He went and he did just according to the word of the Lord. He lived by the brook Kerith, east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. But after a while, the brook dried up because there was no rain. Now, you could argue, if you like, that he went and hid himself in the hills at God's instruction for protection. But that doesn't make any sense. If you remember what he said to the king, there'll be no dew or rain these years except by my word. Well, nobody's going to pay any attention to him or worry over him for that statement. He could have stayed in town. In fact, most prophets didn't take a hike. And once the drought is real, and it's obvious, even if he was in town, you wouldn't kill him, because the only way it's going to rain is by his word. So he's as good as rain. Funny way to think of it. But the point is, he could be safe. But the problem is, if you think about it, sending him away from the king is sending the word away. And when you don't have access to the word of God, you have the ultimate curse, because that means the presence of God has been withdrawn. So we should think of it, at least in part, as a withdrawal of God's, of everything, because the curse is still left, but there's no possibility of blessing, because you don't have the only man who could bring blessing. He's gone. Then, of course, the drought is bad there, so then the Lord, it's extended now east of the Jordan, so it's a pretty bad drought. We don't know you can't tell at this point how long this has lasted, at least a full season. And then the word of the Lord came to him, arise and go to Zarephath. Now he's going to cross back the Jordan and go to a Mediterranean coastal town of the Phoenicians. So off to Zarephath is basically, somebody said, I had a funny line from someone, let's go meet that Baal fellow. Because that's where he goes. He goes to Baal territory. He goes into Phoenician territory. This is a town between Sidon and Tyre on the coast, and that's where he goes. So he goes right into Baal territory. The lady that he meets there is she's no Yahwist. She's no follower of the Lord. She's a Baalite. I mean, would be just an ordinary Phoenician. So he goes to Phoenician territory. He says, go there, and you stay there. I mean, you'd have to have instructions to do this. This is the sort of thing that come to mind. Right? Behold, I've commanded a widow there to feed you. Now, one of the things you learn with this text is not that there's food there. This is not like the story of Ruth. There's food there, and that's why I'm sending you. No, there's no food there either. In fact, a historian of the ancient world, this period, Menander, describes a terrible drought he's only interested in the Phoenician era, under the Tyrian king Itobal. Evidently, they all had Baal in their name, just the way Israelites like to put Yah at the end of their names. Elijah, Jeremiah, everybody put God at the end. The first part describes some relationship to the Lord. Well, so the Phoenicians had those kind of names too. So in secular history, this drought was a noteworthy event in the whole region, right? So someone is commanded. So he gets there, and when he got to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there. When you have the word behold, just translate, this is the situation. So when he came to the gate of the city, this was the situation. A widow there was gathering sticks, and he called her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel, that I may drink. So she was going to bring it, and he called out to her, by the way, bring me a morsel of bread. And she says, well, as the Lord your God lives. All right? So she knows he's an Israelite by either his speech, language, dress, something. But she doesn't own Yahweh for her God. But remember, it's not that they didn't acknowledge, you have to be careful. It's not that they didn't acknowledge the existence of other people's gods. Everybody's got a God. Right? Everybody's got a God. We had gods. In fact, they had more than one God. We're going to meet one of their other gods in a second. But Baal was the storm god, the rain god. That's why the contest is over rain, because he's the storm god. I mean, if you can't get rain out of your storm god, your God is having a bad day. Right? So the storm god is having a tough time. And he's now living where the storm god is. And this lady is experiencing the drought the same. She says, as the Lord your God lives, I don't have anything baked. And in fact, I just have a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil. And I'm gathering up some sticks to, obviously, to bake a fire, prepare for myself and my son so we can eat it and die. So we are now at the extremity of life. And Elijah says, do not be afraid. The Bible often has this little line there, and that's an idiotic thing to say to somebody, isn't it? Don't be afraid. You're going to die. No, I mean, don't be afraid. Nothing's going to bad happen. I mean, this is a foreign guy, who worships the wrong God, not the local God anyway. And he says, don't be afraid. Go and do just as I have said. But I want you first to do as you have said. But first make a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterwards, you make something for you and for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the jar of flour shall not be spent, the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the land. I mean, that's a tall order. This is a pagan girl with a son, presumably no husband, and she has enough to make one meal. And he says, you make the meal for me, and then you make something for yourself. So this is we would say in Old Testament terms, we'd say this is the great commandment, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your strength, all your might, all your mind. This is the Shema, right? The Hear, O Israel. Lord first, right? But I mean, this girl wouldn't know. This is not her line of thinking. This is foreign. And she went, verse 15, the miracle of the text, she went and did as Elijah said. And she and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, nor did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he had spoken to Elijah. So he goes into Baal territory, and he tells a Baalite lady not to worry, that he'll take care of her, provided that she take care of him first. I mean, it's a good thing the Lord already picked out a person, because it's hard to think of anybody else who would have agreed to a situation like that. Okay, so then, that's all. There's really not much to say about this other than the faith of this woman. She's putting blind trust in a God she doesn't know anything about, other than this episode. Now, at this point, she knows that he is able to do the impossible. So there's obviously a seed sown there. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, he became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, what have you against me, O man of God? That's a relatively new term for us. We get at the end of the text as well. What have you against me? You have come to bring my sin to remembrance. here's an interesting thing, the connection between sin and death. A fundamental idea sown in the fabric of mankind, left over of the image of God, is the connection between sin and death. You cannot find a culture, I won't say you couldn't, but just about every culture in the world has some sort of a religious instinct, and that religious instinct is bound up about the issue of sin and death, the connection, intimate connection. People threw people into volcanoes, threw them over cliffs, burned. In the Phoenician culture, they killed their babies to stop the wrath of God. Everybody was due to kill at least one child, sacrifice, slit the throat, burn the body on an altar. To Topheth was the name of the altar. And eventually the Israelite kings will practice the same practice. But it was common among, that's what came from the Phoenicians. And the god of death, his name is Mot. It's funny, similar to the Roman word, Latin word. And even Baal bowed to Mot, the death god. And so the death god has won the battle. The death god has taken the son, but she sees a connection, but she's now associating this death with her disobedience to her God by being faithful to his God. And your God didn't protect me. You brought this on me. And so we're now faced, this. Now the contest first was over a loaf of bread. Now the contest is over the death of the little boy. And Mot won. Mot killed the boy. As far as she's concerned, it was retribution for listening to the man of God, the man of Yahweh. Give me your son. And he took the boy from her arms, and he carried him up to the upper chamber where he lodged, and laid him on his own bed. And he cried out to the Lord, O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourned by killing her son? He stretched himself out over the child 3 times, and he cried out to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. Elijah, by the way, that's a nice line, because